Last day of the month of May. May was pretty good. It's a pretty good month. A lot went down. A couple of things that we didn't see happening. We're going to talk about a few of those items today, including DeAndre Hopkins getting released. We never really had a chance to talk about that. I had to put a separate video out to kind of talk about my surprise. It still doesn't make sense to me to this day. I still don't have real clarification as to why they did what they did. I've made sense of it in my head, but we're going to talk about that a little bit today and where he may end up. The Raiders continue to be among the most disorganized, dysfunctional franchises heading into the 2023 season. We'll talk about that today. And we'll talk about anything else in between. There's some other topics to get to, including something I find interesting this time of the year. Best free agents still available. You kind of forget some of these guys are even out there kind of just sitting, waiting for someone to pick up the phone and give them a call. There's still some quality football players that will end up on NFL rosters before it's all said and done. So we'll talk about them as well and anything else that we deem fit here on the 340th installment of the Louie T Network podcast that starts now. The Louie T Network is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description. Who else could it be but me, your man, Louie T? Welcome to the 340th installment of the Louie T Network podcast. I, of course, am your set man, Louie T. Thank you for joining me on the program. A couple of items I want to take care of, some house cleaning, if you will. First things first. I know you guys who are subscribers on MusicHead University have seen that I haven't been active on that particular channel lately. No fret, no worries. I'll be back in action tomorrow, and I've got a bevy of shows lined up. So you'll get an upload tomorrow. You'll get an upload on Friday, and then we'll get back to our normal schedule of Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So be on the lookout for that, and they'll be coming at you over the next couple of days. I may even throw in a bonus because it's been a while. We'll see what happens, but you'll definitely get an upload tomorrow and Friday as well. So we'll be back. May just ended with so much going on, including my anniversary, that, you know, that kind of got pushed a bit to the back burner, but bat like cook crack, no worries. So I will be attending to that channel tomorrow. So don't worry about that. Also, NBA Finals. Two teams are set. Denver Nuggets, Miami Heat. This is what we expected after the two series got off to 3-0 starts. However, we did not expect the Miami series to go as long as it ultimately did, going a full 7 games, but we still got to the outcome that we thought we were going to reach when that series hit 3-0 in favor of the Heat. Now, you know, it's crazy how we got to that point. The game 6 was insane. And I had talked about game 6 and the Heat needing to win and the pressure that they were going to feel needing to win that game, not wanting to have to go back to Boston for game 7. And the dramatic way that game ended on the White tip in for the win was just crazy. And that, to me, is a soul-crushing loss that most NBA teams in general, when you lose a heartbreaker like that, it's hard to overcome that and bounce back on the road in a game 7, no less. For the Heat to go on the road and do what they did after such a soul-crushing, that Derek White tip-in, that kills most teams in the NBA. Straight up. There's no coming back from that. To have a trip to the NBA Finals within your grasp and literally have it snatched from you in that fashion at the buzzer, I can't think of many teams that bounce back in the fashion that they ultimately did. So, in saying that, you got to give them credit. It's funny because I was talking to my buddy, and he was adamant that the Celtics were going to win Game 7. He wasn't even interested in watching because he already knew the outcome. I'm like, bro, there's a reason that no team has come back from 3-0 in NBA history. There's a reason that this thing that they call heat culture exists. I said, I didn't outright pick the Heat to win, but indirectly, I told him the Heat, if there's any team that can come back from a devastating loss like that and win, it's the Miami Heat. And I've been very consistent with this message as well. If there's any team that doesn't give a damn about home court advantage and taking care of home and making sure that they protect their home court, it's the Boston Celtics. So when you put those two things together, what I found the most interesting was after the Game 6 loss, the Heat players were more adamant that they were going to win than the Celtics players were. The Heat players and their coach, Eric Spoelstra said, if we could play Game 7 right now, we would. That's how upset we are, how ready we are. If we could play Game 7 right now, we would do it. Jimmy Butler says, we're winning Game 7. They were confident that they were going to Boston and they were going to complete the mission of getting to the NBA Finals. The Celtics weren't as confident. They were just happy to survive. You saw it in Game 7. And a lot of people are going to talk about the Jason Tatum ankle injury, and rightfully so. Any hopes of them winning in convincing fashion like they did against the 76ers in the Game 7 in the previous series, they were thrown out the window. Those hopes were dashed. And them winning the game was severely compromised when Jason Tatum rolled his ankle on the very first possession of the game. You cannot discount that. You cannot minimize the impact that had on Game 7. However, the better team won the game. That was the Miami Heat. They were better coached. They played harder. They played together. They executed better. They were the better team in this series. Guys stepped up. Nobody wants to hear about injuries because nobody's more banged up than the Heat are at this point. So anybody using the excuse of injuries, the Heat don't want to hear it. Jimmy Butler's got a sprained ankle. Don't forget, he sprained his ankle in that series against the New York Knicks. You think he's 100% healthy from that sprained ankle? Hell no. He's just played through it. That's what you do this time of the year, right? He's not 100%. We know Tyler Hero is trying to get back into the swing of things and may be available for them in the NBA Finals, but he hasn't been available for them pretty much the entire postseason. They have been without another guy that was a key contributor for them in Victor Oladipo. They're banged up. So they don't want to hear your excuses about injuries. They just have the next man up mentality. Duncan Robinson stepped up, was huge in that series. Caleb Martin, I can't begin to quantify the importance of what he did in that series, particularly Game 7. But I can go all the way back to Game 2, where the Celtics were on the verge of blowing out Miami, and Caleb Martin single-handedly carried them and kept them in that game so that game didn't get to 20 or 22. It got to like 16, and Caleb Martin kept them within striking distance, and then Jimmy Butler got a little, something going on in his ear, and then he did the rest. They stepped up. When they had to have it, they got it. Gabe Vincent went down, missed a game in this series with an ankle. So I've been so impressed with the Heat. I've been so impressed with Eric Spoelstra. I've already said that he's the best coach in the NBA, and I don't think any other coach, I don't want to hear about Greg Popovich or Steve Kerr or any of these other guys. Nobody else could have taken the table scraps that Eric Spoelstra has been given and make them into what they are, which is a team competing for an NBA championship right now, especially with the injuries and a wasted roster spot on Udonis Haslem. Are you kidding me? This is going to be a fun series, but I think it's the Denver Nuggets all the way. I just don't see how the Heat have an answer for the Joker. And if they're getting the contributions that we think they're going to get from the others, the guys that have stepped up and played really well for them, we know about the big two in Denver and what they're fully capable of. Jamal Murray, of course, and Joker, right? If those two do what they've been doing, and you get contributions from KCP and Gordon and and what's my man's name, the shooter, Michael Porter Jr., right? If you're getting contributions from Bruce Brown off the bench, I don't know how you beat the Denver Nuggets if you're the Miami Heat. But we'll see. The Nuggets have been a well-oiled machine, mowing their way through the Western Conference playoffs, and now we'll see if the Miami Heat have what it takes after a grueling 7-game series. The Nuggets have been chilling for the last week and a half. Doesn't mean anything though. The more rested team doesn't necessarily equal, better results. But in this particular case, the Heat are banged up. The Nuggets are well rested. They're at home. I could easily see the Nuggets taking care of business in the first 2 games and shifting this thing back to Miami with the Heat, desperately looking to get back on track. Because here's the thing, is the same thing the Lakers had done until they met the Nuggets. They had won a game on the road early in the series to put the pressure on the home team, the team with the higher seed. Lakers had done that in the first 2 series against both the Grizzlies and the Warriors. They weren't able to do that to the Nuggets. Nuggets haven't lost a game at home the entire postseason. Heat have done that in every single series. Did it against Milwaukee, did it against the Knicks, did it against the Boston Celtics. Took both of the games in Boston to start that series off. I don't think they're going to do that to the Denver Nuggets. And that's where I think that this series is going to be different. But we'll see what happens. Anyway, I want to talk about the Vegas Raiders. So let's go ahead and jump into the gem dropping session, shall we? Yeah, I think we shall. Let me drop this gem on your melon. Open your mind, let your conscience be free. You're now rolling with your man, Louie T-double-E. Let me open you up. Get you thinking a little bit. So, one of my favorite movies, I've told you guys this before. One of my favorite movies is Dumb and Dumber. And one of the lines in that movie, I almost know the entire movie word for word, line for line. I've watched it so many times. And one of the lines in the movie, Lloyd says to Harry when they're at the restaurant, he said, Harry, you're one pathetic loser. And he goes, no offense. And Harry says, none taken. I think about Josh McDaniels as a head coach with that particular line. I'm like, Josh McDaniels as a head coach is one pathetic loser. We saw it in Denver, his first stint. And generally, coaches learn so much from a failed first stint as a head coach in the league. And you swear you're not going to make the same mistakes the second time. He's not only made the same mistakes again he's making them on a much larger scale and destroying what was a very competitive team when he took over in the process. There's no more Derek Carr in Vegas. And you know what? I'm not here to defend Derek Carr. He had one of those really tumultuous, rocky relationships with Raiders fans over the years. Every year it seemed like he was the point of contention in terms of, do we need to upgrade the quarterback position? Is he good enough? I felt like under John Gruden, he was getting better and better every single year, was Derek Carr, to the point where you felt like they may be able to actually win something of note with Derek Carr there. Josh McDaniels comes in, similar to what he did with Jay Cutler when he was in Denver the first time. He comes in, he gets rid of their quarterback. It doesn't really replace him with anybody of note. He got rid of Brandon Marshall when he was in Denver the first time around, and they were absolutely garbage after that. They went out and got a receiver, but that guy's going to want to leave here shortly. Like, he didn't come to Vegas to play with Jimmy Garoppolo, right? That roster is weird because they don't have any direction. You already heard Davante Adams talk about the lack of direction with the offense, and you can tell that they don't really know how to handle anything because Josh McDaniels says he has every right to be frustrated. No, he doesn't. Like, if there's direction, then he wouldn't be frustrated. But the fact that you don't have direction, you lack it, and they don't really know what the hell. It's the same shit we heard before the season last year with New England. Remember? Players are coming out and saying, I don't really know what the hell we're doing on offense, but again, it's above my pay grade, but I don't really know what the hell's going on right now. This shouldn't be happening with Josh McDaniels as the head coach because he's an offensive-minded guy. So if anything, the offense shouldn't be the issue, but it is. However, that's not what I want to talk about. We've already talked about Davante Adams and how I think he's going to want out by the trade deadline this upcoming season. I want to talk about Jimmy Garoppolo's situation because my buddy hit me up and he's like, I hate being a Raiders fan. And that's the first thing he said to me. I hate being a Raiders fan. He says, I think I'm going to take a year. This is his move right here. And I've already called him out for this sort of bitch assness. Like, you can't quit your team when it's convenient for you. Now, everybody's different. And I've seen Washington fans take a break from the team because they're mentally drained. They don't have anything left to give the organization. And I understand how that can be. Look, sports are supposed to be a diversion from real life. And it's supposed to be one that brings you excitement and joy, not anguish and pain and despair. So when it starts to kind of lean into the negative side of things and you start to really feel it wearing on you, maybe you do need to take a step back. I would caution that if it's taking that kind of a toll on you significantly, look, I'll be the first to tell you, when my team loses in a big game, or for Washington in particular, because I care about that team so much, when they lose any game, I'm down. But it's like 24 hours. You know, I snap out of it after I've had a chance to kind of process everything, and then I move on. All right. If a team is affecting you in ways that it lingers for much longer than it should, maybe you do need a break. But that's not what my buddy goes through, okay? Because he's very good at compartmentalizing. He just doesn't want to deal with this shit that the Raiders are doing because he doesn't feel like there's a direction. He never wanted Josh McDaniels. I told him he's the worst option you could hire, and he's seeing it now, and he's sick of it already, and he already wants out. But there's no sight of the end with him in Vegas because their GM came from New England. They're buddies. As long as he's there, Josh McDaniels is going to have an opportunity to try to right whatever wrongs he creates in Vegas. Case in point, Jimmy Garoppolo. So you move on from Derek Carr, and that was messy the way that they did that. That's not how you're supposed to do a guy the ilk of Derek Carr, who has done so much for that organization over the last 6-7 years. That's not how you handle that. I get why they did what they did, because you don't want him getting injured and then now you can't move him, right? You can't release him, can't do anything with him. They wanted to trade him, and Derek Carr, to his credit, was like, nah, I'm not going along with that. I don't respect y'all enough to try to help y'all on the back end of this thing as I'm moving out of here. Nah, go ahead and release me. I'll pick my next team. But they did that kind of janky, okay? Kind of made to embarrass him towards the end of the season last year, which wasn't a good look. They don't have any identity or direction this year. I feel like, botched the Darren Waller situation. All right. He's no longer there. I talked about getting rid of Brandon Marshall. They got rid of Darren Waller. That's dumb to me. That's really stupid in my estimation. But that's what they're doing. They're pissing people off. Waller so my buddy, he hit me up on, I want to say it was Friday last week. He's like, I want out. I think I'm about to take a break from the Raiders this year. I don't think I'm going to participate. I was like, man, shut that dumbass shit up, man. Stop that shit, man. And he's like, bro, did you see all of the headlines today? I'm like, I saw one or two of them. He was like, bro, I saw the Adams thing. I saw the Jimmy Garoppolo thing. And then Darren Waller had something to say with the Giants, all in the same day. I'm like, oh, okay. I didn't see the Waller thing. All right. So what did Waller say? And he proceeds to tell me, that Waller pretty much was like, I like being here in New York. They value your opinion. So that tells you that they're doing that Patriot way shit that Belichick does in New England, where it's my way or the highway, which, again, Belichick can do that because he's only got to do this right here, right? He's only got to show you the fingers and say, hey, get out of here. Listen to me, right? My problem with the Patriot way, with these cronies that spring off of his tree, is that they expect people to just jump and do what they say, even though they're not Bill Belichick. We saw it with Matt Patricia. We're seeing it with Josh McDaniels for the second time. We saw it with Charlie Weiss. We've seen it with enough guys to know that shit does not work. Action with no substance is a no-go, right? So he's like, I'm done with this. And he said, I'm not even getting into the Jimmy. Did you know about the Jimmy situation? I was like, nah, not really. I remember very vaguely the Raiders saying that the Jimmy Garoppolo press conference was going to be on this date. And then they had to push it back. But I didn't care. It's not my team. I wasn't looking forward to hearing Jimmy Garoppolo speak, so it didn't really register for me. Oh, okay. What did he say? Oh, he didn't have it today? Oh, okay. Whatever. Come to find out, the reason they postponed that presser, and the Raiders did what they were supposed to do in that moment, is they downplayed the significance of the postponement and said, oh no, we just had some things come up, and we'll have it here shortly. But ultimately what happened is that they gave Jimmy Garoppolo, as every team does when they get a new player into their facility, they gave him a physical, and Jimmy Garoppolo failed the physical. So they spotted an injury on his foot that required surgery, and they essentially went back and altered the contract that they were going to give Jimmy Garoppolo to sign, to kind of mitigate their involvement in anything that may happen with Jimmy. If your foot turns out to be a problem, we're not on the hook. We're not liable, meaning we don't have to pay you. So they went back, made an addendum to the contract, a couple of alterations that essentially said, hey, you are aware of this foot injury that you have. You're aware that you need surgery. And if this foot injury should linger, or it should not heal properly, or it should cost you time, we can cut you with zero, risk on our end. And so they went back and reworked the contract. So they knew about the Jimmy Garoppolo foot injury. Signed him anyway. Now, he should be ready for the start of training camp. That's what we've been told. We'll see. But one, Jimmy Garoppolo stays hurt. That's the reason the 49ers weren't able to move him last offseason. His ass was injured. He had the shoulder injury, I think it was, that required surgery. And so the 49ers ended up having to hold on to him. And it ended up benefiting them because Trey Lance gets injured. Jimmy Garoppolo was able to step in, stabilize things. Then he gets hurt. And then, the legend of Brock Purdy is born, right? But Josh McDaniels, so hasty to go out and get Jimmy Garoppolo that this foot injury happens, or it is there, it exists, and something has to be done about it. And now look at the Raiders. What if this thing lingers longer than they think? What if this thing has, a longer time frame? Again, they don't have any real options behind Jimmy Garoppolo. And really, the way I look at it is Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get hurt at some point during the season. He's turning into one of those guys. It's not a matter of if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to get hurt. It's when is he going to get hurt and how long is he going to be injured for? When's the last time Jimmy Garoppolo's played a full season? Anyway, it's really, really, and again, this is part of the reason why I feel like Davante Adams is going to want out. Is because it's going to be so dysfunctional, and he didn't come there to play with Billy Ho at quarterback. Like, there's nothing behind Jimmy Garoppolo. We thought the Raiders could go after a quarterback in the draft at some point. They probably should have. They didn't. We'll see what happens. But this is a mess right now. Darren Waller speaking out, Davante Adams speaking out. This Jimmy Garoppolo foot situation. This is a mess. This Raiders football team right now. And they don't have the right guys in place to clean it up. That's the problem. It's only going to get messier, which I love because karma doesn't miss, and nobody has more bad karma coming their way than karma's still getting back at him for what he did to the Indianapolis Colts, leaving them at the altar. So I'm enjoying this, but it's painful to watch because my boy is a Raiders fan, and they haven't snapped the ball yet this year, and he's already going through it, thinking about sitting the season out. I'm like, what is that going to do? What is that going to change? Anyway, I digress. Josh McDaniels is going to wreck the Raiders. And if they're not careful and they allow that GM to stay there long enough, he's going to do irreparable damage as well. That whole situation looks like it's going straight to hell in a handbasket. You still got Allegiant Stadium though, right? It's a nice facility, man. It's a nice little stadium you got there. Oy vey, the Raiders look like they're going to be in some trouble this year. I digress. Anyway, let's transition to social media maneuvers. I'm a midday marauder. Y'all know what it is. I want to go through this list. I stumbled on a list today of the best free agents available in the NFL. And it's funny because you don't really know who's left if you're not following close enough. Usually as fans of teams, we do a really good job of keeping up with what our team does and our team needs, not necessarily focused on what everybody else is doing or what free agents are left, who didn't get signed. Not really, too worried about that. You're just worried about, hey, If your team doesn't need an edge rusher, then you're not really keeping up with what edge rushers haven't been signed in free agency. Your team doesn't need a receiver. You're not really too concerned with what receiver hasn't signed or has signed. If you need offensive line help, that's where you're focusing at, right? You need tight end help, that's where you're focusing. How many of these guys have been taken? How many of these guys have been taken? Anyway, as we sit here about to turn the calendar from May to June, and we see this every year, veterans are available this time of the year. They don't have to be at these OTAs, and a lot of these guys don't want to be there anyway. So they're in no rush to sign with anyone. But as you get closer to the start of training camp, you get some injuries in these, minis and these OTAs. These veterans become more and more viable as options. So here's a quick list of remaining free agents. Marcus Peters at the cornerback position. Marcus Peters was never a tremendous athlete to begin with. He's getting older. He's dealt with some big time injuries. And so, I think he tore his ACL 2 years ago, 2021, I believe. So it's not like he's a spring chicken, and it's not like, he's at the apex of his career, which is why he's available. Still, with that said, I expect him to end up on a roster before it's all said and done. I think he is in that range, that 30, 31-year-old range, somewhere in there. I've already told you guys this many times over. There are two positions in particular in the NFL that is no country for old men: running back position and the cornerback position. 30 or 31 isn't like a death sentence like it is for running back at corner. But unless you had a step or two to give, you get to 30, 31 years old, and that's pretty much where you start to see the massive decline. Now, if you got a couple steps to give, you'll be able to hang around, or your claim to fame is it was never speed, but it was more quickness, which in the case of a Marcus Peters, he was never really fast nor quick. His ability to play the ball and be very aware has always been his calling card. So maybe a transition to safety or playing in a zone heavy scheme, which is probably always suited him best anyway, would be something that, would entice a team. But he's a head case. He's been very injured lately, and you can't ask him to cover anybody man to man at all. And most zones, especially if you're talking about the deep zones, most of those convert to man. He can't run. So it'll be interesting to see. It always feels like guys like him go back home. Baltimore seems like where he'll ultimately end back up, but we'll see what happens. Robbie Gould, place kicker that has been with the 49ers for a number of years, spent the first part of his career, a huge chunk of it, in Chicago, and the last probably like 6 or 7 years, it feels like, in San Francisco. He's 40 years old, which doesn't mean a damn thing with place kickers. His leg is still live. I don't think he's the guy you want kicking a 53-yarder anymore, but anything under 50, and that's kind of where I have a little issue with a Robbie Gould, is because I think he can kick it from 52, 53. I wouldn't be really looking for him to do that, though, and I wouldn't be asking him to do that very often, which is why you want the young kickers. And the 49ers went out and they, drafted Jake Moody in the draft. And so that's the end of Robbie Gould, obviously, in San Francisco, which is why he's a free agent. And he's money from, anything under, 50 yards. The question is, how often in today's NFL are you going to be comfortable sending your kicker out there or not sending your kicker, rather? I think that's the better way to put it. Not sending your kicker out there from 54, 55. Like, most teams want to be able to send their field goal kicker out there. Like, so there's two things. If you've got confidence in your kicker That's one. And if your team can score the ball prolifically, that's two. Because if you're bitching up, you're afraid that if I miss this field goal, I'm going to give away great field position, then that means you don't score enough points. You're not afraid of what could happen if they miss. So you see teams with kickers with big legs like Vegas and the Chiefs and the Ravens. They don't give a shit. They trust their kicker, and that's number one. Daniel Carlson in Vegas and Harrison Butker, even though he had a rough year, I felt like last year in Kansas City, and obviously Justin Tucker in Baltimore. Teams with guys with big legs, and there are plenty of them around the league now. There are more of those kinds of kickers than there are guys that you don't trust, like the kicker we're talking about right now, and Robbie Gould. Kicking from distances. There's many more of those in the league that are banging them from 54, 55, 56. And so you got to be able to send your kicker out there from these distances now. You get to the 36-yard line, that's a field goal. You got to attempt that 54-yard field goal now. Unless the conditions are a little rough, you're kicking into the wind, or it's swirling winds down there, they're cross winds, you don't know where they're going, hard to predict, that kind of thing. Yeah, I get that. But if it's a controlled environment, you're inside, or it's a pretty sterile day, you should be kicking that 54-yard field goal. You can't be leaving those opportunities and punting the ball. A lot of times you're not even, reaping the benefits of punting that thing, because it either goes in the end zone or your kicker's afraid of it going in the end zone. And so they're fair catching the ball at the 12-yard line. What did he do? You netted 24 yards. Great job. So I think that's going to be the problem for Robbie Gould. I don't know if he'll find work or not. I'll just say this. There will come a time this season where a team that thinks they're good is going to have some issues with their field goal kicker, and Robbie Gould will be around. He'll be available. We just talked to Law last night, and he said the Cowboys currently don't have a kicker. Well, Robbie Gould could be in play for the Dallas Cowboys. We will see. Another guy that's available, Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy! I'm shocked, actually. Generally, guys like Teddy Bridgewater are hot commodities in free agency and are among the first to sign. Every year we go through quarterback musical chairs. Where are these veteran backups going to end up? And usually they come off the board rather quickly. I remember it was 2 years ago in 2021 where everybody was out signing theirs. The Bears signed Andy Dalton. Washington signed Ryan Fitzpatrick. Teddy Bridgewater ended up in Denver. Let me see. Case Keenum ended up somewhere. I don't really remember, but everybody went and grabbed theirs quickly, right? You see that most years. I'm shocked that Teddy Bridgewater doesn't have a home yet, but last year was a rough year for him. It was not a good look for him. Tons of injuries. Dolphins had to play their third string quarterback, not only in week 18 to get into the playoffs, but also in that playoff game against the Buffalo Bills in Wild Card Weekend. They had to play their third string quarterback because Teddy Bridgewater wasn't healthy. So it wasn't a good year for him health-wise. And so I'm thinking that's kind of hurt his stock a bit, but I don't know. I'm actually really surprised. I'm going to be honest with you, because unless something catastrophic happens in camp with the team at quarterback position, the value of having a Teddy Bridgewater is right now. With a young quarterback or a team that, has a young quarterback that they're growing. This is the time where a veteran like Teddy Bridgewater is invaluable. You're helping that quarterback, learn a process. You're helping him study, see some things, talk about those things now, laying that foundation for a healthy working relationship in the quarterback room. Like, all of those things are transpiring now. As you get closer to the season, unless there's a team that desperately needs a backup quarterback, I don't really know if Teddy finds work this year. It'll be interesting. I can't really think of a team that is in desperate need of a backup quarterback. Who's the backup in Buffalo? It was Case Keenum, right? He went back to Houston. Do they have a backup quarterback in Buffalo? Like that's like it's got to be a place like that where starters already established. There's no clear-cut backup that you trust. That's a landing destination for Teddy Bridgewater. Are there a lot of those around the league? I don't think there are a lot of those around the league, though. That's why I'm shocked that he hasn't found work. But anyway, Jadeveon Clowney, every year, this time of the year, Jadeveon Clowney is available. I can't think of the last time that we went into a season and he was already on a team this time of the year. He's usually on a one-year deal, and the next year he's kind of waiting, and then he doesn't get signed until August at some point or July. Here we are again. So we'll see what happens. He'll end up on somebody's roster. He'll end up probably stealing money like he always does. He'll play in 6 games, be injured the other 10 or 11, and you'll be like, damn, didn't really feel like we got our money's worth. Ask the Tennessee Titans how that worked out for him. So we'll see where he ends up. Dalton Reisner is very interesting to me. I thought he would be one of the hotter inside interior offensive line commodities of free agency, but there's been a lot of talk about him as a locker room guy. He got into it with one of the quarterbacks in Denver. He's been very vocal about different things in Denver. I think that hurt his stock. When you hear all these stories about him, I know I soured on him hearing about some of the things. And it'd be one thing if he was dominant on the field. He's okay, right? He's okay. He's not great. He's not terrible. You could do a lot worse than Dalton Reisner. But you couple some of the things you've heard about him as a teammate in the locker room with some of the issues he's had on the field, and you're like, I'm good. I think I'm going to pass. So while I am surprised, I'm not as much as I am like Teddy Bridgewater, for instance. I just thought he would be on a team. Offensive line is such a big time position that you have to fill, that I just thought he'd be on a roster already. And ultimately, I think he will be on a roster by the time the regular season rolls around. But I'm shocked that he hasn't found a new home. Absolutely shocked. Thought he would be on a team by now. Yannick Ngakoue is turning into another Jadeveon Clowney type where you're used to him being available this time of the year. Feels like his last 2 or 3 stops have been similar to this. Indy, Vegas. Feels like it's kind of been this revolving door of him being available. It all started with him leaving Jacksonville. I think he went to the Vikings first. I think there was a trade there. That didn't really work out the way that they thought. Then he ended up in Vegas. Then I think it was Indy. And now he's available again. And he's been solid. It's not like he, doesn't produce. He had 9.5 sacks last year. So, I mean, that's what you're looking for. Again, there's no rush. He'll be on a team, though. That's one of those commodities that teams pay for. Guys that can get to the quarterback. He can still do it. We'll see where he ends up. Frank Clark was a very notable release this offseason. And I told you, I'm not interested. I'm not a huge Frank Clark guy. I think his name and reputation precedes him, but he doesn't necessarily live up to that billing, if you understand what I mean. He's, I think, a really active run defender, gets occasional pressure, but I don't really think he is the kind of guy that moves the needle per se. But again, in this league, pass rusher is one of the most sought after commodities on the defensive side of the football. You'll be hard pressed to see Frank Clark looking for work past August. He'll be on a roster of a team. And to me, he's a I'm one piece away type of guy. So, you know, Cincinnati, San Francisco, teams like that could use some depth on the defensive line. Those are the types of places I see a Frank Clark maybe ending up. Leonard Floyd, really shocked that Gumby isn't on somebody's roster. Thought he had some really good years with the Rams. He had 9 sacks last year. I'm shocked that these guys that put up such, good numbers like Yannick Ngakoue last year and just not on a team. Like Leonard Floyd can help somebody. And he will. Somebody will sign him. He will be on an NFL roster. I'm not too worried about him, but I'm just shocked that he hasn't been signed yet. And obviously, with veterans like him and Yannick Ngakoue and some of these other guys we talked about, you wait to see what happens after the draft, right? Because you want to see what you get in the draft. You want to see how these young guys show up and respond at these, the rookie minis and then the OTAs. You want to see what you have first. Then you assess the entire roster, and then you start going into particulars with each position, and then you figure out, do we need to upgrade this particular position as we head to training camp? There's going to always be teams looking for pass rush help. And to me, Leonard Floyd is probably the best that is available in the market of pass rush. I just told you Frank Clark, Yannick Ngakoue, Leonard Floyd are all available as pass rushers. So is Jadeveon Clowney. You want to throw him in there as well. To me, Leonard Floyd is the best of that group. So I expect him to find work, but I'm actually surprised that a lot of those guys are still available. So anyway, I digress. Let's get to the comment section, see if you guys have anything to add to the conversation. If you're out there and you want your comment to be read, super chats are the way to ensure that your comment gets read. Also, you can use the hashtag LouieTLive to have your comment read on the air if it is pertinent. And if we have time, we'll get to as many of those comments as possible. So Mike Lowry writes, Chase and Tez have the same agent. Do you think the agent told them not to show up for contract reasons? And with them having the same agent, does it help or hurt chances of bringing them back? I don't think the agent told them to stay away because of contract reasons necessarily. I do think he probably advised them to do that. But Chase has been doing that since he got here. Montez has been doing that since he got here. Like, this has been their thing. So I don't know if all of a sudden this year we put extra emphasis on it because they're both in a contract year. I think this is their move. They prefer to be away from the team when it's not mandatory. But their agent probably told them as well, look, stay away if you can, because again, you don't want anything to happen while you're out there. So remember, Daron Payne's agent told him not to go, and he chose to still show up. So most agents will tell their clients, no, don't. If they haven't paid you, don't go to the OTAs. As far as will it help or hurt their chances, I think every situation is unique. The agent is going to do what's in the best interest of each and every single client, independent of each other. So despite them playing the same position and being on the same team, if Montez Sweat has a 13 and a half sack season and forces 5 fumbles, meanwhile, Chase Young has 5 sacks this season and is dominant against the run, but didn't post the numbers that we were looking for from him, that's not going to stop Washington from negotiating, nor his agent from negotiating with Washington and allowing Chase Young to walk. That's not going to have any impact. Now, again, if both of them have tremendous seasons, Tez is 13 and a half, Chase has 13, both were dominant against the run. Montez, again, 5 forced fumbles, Chase 4 forced fumbles. Both were absolutely dominant players for us. Then I think it comes into play because the agent can, and again, if you're an agent, you know what the team is offering Chase versus Tez, but you shouldn't be disseminating that information to those clients individually. Like Chase shouldn't know what's going on with Montez's situation unless he gets that information from Tez, right? And vice versa. Like the agent shouldn't be telling Chase, hey, this is what Tez is getting, this is what you should get. That, like, he's supposed to keep those situations separate, right? For his intel, he would love to know what they think of Montez, what they think of Chase, so he can use that in maybe working a deal for his guy, whether it's Chase or Tez or both of them, kind of pitting those numbers against them. But at the end of the day, the agent is going to do what's best for his client. And it's not going to really hinder, his job in trying to facilitate a deal for either one of those guys or both of them. The bottom line is Washington really can't afford to sign both of them. They're going to have to choose one or the other. And honestly, the play on the field is going to dictate that. So we'll see what happens. Red Wing 01 writes, I understand your concerns with them overloading Forbes by moving him around, but I also get their rationale. The reason Curl is so smart is because he played everywhere in college. It goes both ways, and I mentioned that in the video, that I understand where they're coming from. And if a guy can handle it, like in the case of Cam Curl, that part of the reason he was so impactful immediately as a rookie is because they moved him around, because they put so much on his plate. And because he's such a smart football player, he was able to process all of that, and it did not bog him down. It helped him be exceptional in that rookie season, and it's helped shape and mold him into the player that he's ultimately become for us. However, we've seen the opposite happen with Jamin Davis, where they brought him in here, started him outside, then they moved him inside, green dot on his helmet. He's got to get everybody lined up, teaching them all the linebacker positions, and his head was about to explode. And you could tell he was overloaded as a rookie, and it didn't work out well for him. So you just got to know who you're dealing with. And this is the time to find out. This is the time where you put a lot on their plate and see how they handle it. And if you realize that it's slowing them down, that they're not playing at the same level that they were when they were there for rookie minis or something like that, then maybe that's when you back off. I don't have a problem with it. I don't necessarily love it, though. I'm more of a, hey, let's just focus on what you do well immediately. And then as we go, we'll add more onto your plate. But again, I understand the value in saying, no. I'm going to throw all of this at you at once and see how you handle it. And if you handle it well, then I know you have a much bigger capacity for learning, and we expect a faster learning curve for you, right? I get both sides of it. I just would prefer them to let him be what he was in college, which was a boundary corner with tremendous ball skills. But we'll see what happens. Red Wing 01 writes, oh yeah, and Dantzler, not to toot my own horn, but sips tea. Called it. I think most of us called it. A lot of us felt like but you in particular, remember you had the long post, and I read most of it on the stream, and you particularly singled out Cam Dantzler, as did I. I said I thought he was in trouble with the moves that were made in the draft, but I'm shocked. Maybe you thought this could happen as soon as it did. I'm actually a bit surprised that they moved on from him this soon. I didn't expect him to be on the 53-man roster when it was all said and done, but I expected him to get to camp at least. But him not even making it out of the month of May speaks volumes to me. One, how deep the cornerback room is. Two, they weren't impressed with him at all. So you definitely hit it on the head, though. You definitely were right. HHC Lunar writes, honestly, could really see this season being a disaster for the Raiders, as could I. And again, it's all a part of the Josh McDaniels movement. This is what he brings. Wherever he goes as a head coach, chaos ensues. even when he wasn't the coach of the Colts, but was on the precipice of becoming a coach, the head coach of the Colts, chaos ensued, right? With him starting to get his staff together and then getting cold feet and going back to New England and leaving them high and dry. We saw the disaster that happened in Denver when he got his first chance to be a head coach, with them starting off the season, I think 6-0. And we've heard the stories from guys like DJ Williams and Brandon Marshall and guys that were on that team that they were cheating. They were filming the other team's practices, and that's how they got off to such a good start. It's funny. I remember DJ Williams telling a story on I Am Athlete, I believe it was, where he said, he was like, I can't believe we're this good. And he was like, it felt too good to be true in the moment. But he's like, we winning games, we dominating teams. It felt good. And then they caught us cheating. And, the players weren't a part of that. That was all staff related. But they caught them cheating and they cut that shit off. And immediately they started getting their ass kicked. Immediately, shit turned. He's like, well, we weren't as good as I thought we were. I knew something was up. So this guy is absolutely terrible. And the part that bothers me is he hasn't learned a single thing from his first stop as a head coach. And going back to New England, he didn't learn anything. He's doing the same shit. Got rid of the quarterback, got rid of a big-time pass-catching weapon. They brought in a guy. He's not going to be happy. They're going to probably move him at some point. This shit is going in the exact same direction as how he wrecked the Denver Broncos. All right. Niners fan. Right. Lou, I might have to take it back. Looks like Brock should be ready to go for week 1, but I've been impressed with Trey's corrected mechanics after learning from Mahomes this offseason. Yeah, I was, when you came out and said that he won't be ready, I was shocked. I'm like, felt like there was enough time. But, you know better than I do. You're following every single movement of that organization. And so I trust your judgment. If you tell me he's not going to be ready, Trey Lance is going to have to start, then I trust you. But my thing is, we heard so much smoke about them potentially moving Trey Lance, and I'm just not ready to give up on him yet. And I get what Brock Purdy did. I was of the mindset, and I remember saying this immediately after the season last year. If I'm the 49ers, I've got a camp battle. And I want to see who the better quarterback is. Because you didn't trade up for Trey Lance for nothing. He's not mince meat. He's a better athlete than Brock Purdy. He's probably got a comparable arm, if not a stronger one, than Brock Purdy. He hasn't played as much football. That's the biggest difference, is Purdy has played a ton of football, which means he's a lot further along in his process than that of Trey Lance. And so that gives Purdy the edge there in experience. But everywhere else, I think advantage Trey Lance. So the question is, are you willing to give up on a guy you traded all the way up to number 3 overall to get? Or 3 years in, are you ready to plant your flag, stand in there 10 toes down on a guy you traded up for and say, all right, let's see what you got? As you saw last year, more likely than not, it's going to take more than one quarterback in San Francisco to get the job done. So I wouldn't be looking to move anybody. They brought in Sam Darnold, obviously, so they feel confident that whomever doesn't win, specifically Trey Lance, they'd love to move him if an opportunity arose, right? We'll see what happens. I'm a Trey Lance fan. I've vouched for him, or rather lobbied for him to go to San Francisco because I thought he would be the perfect fit for Kyle Shanahan's offense. And I still think that holds true. So I would love to see him get an opportunity. But again, John Lynch has already come out and said if it were up to him, Brock Purdy's your starter. I know Shanahan loved what he saw from Purdy last year, so we'll see what happens. Independent Outsider writes, what do you think of the Commanders sale and any idea on this owners group and the influence they'll have on Washington, good or bad? And do you give a crap what the team name is? No to the team name. I don't really care. I've stated that numerous times. The influence of this ownership group, I really don't know. None of us really do. All we can do is look at their track record in the past with other organizations that they own, the Devils and the 76ers. Both of those teams are playoff teams and are performing well. So you'd like to think that if he can replicate that here in the NFL, again, different sport, but similar values. It doesn't matter where you go. He's already talked about believing in people and that it's a people's business at the end of the day. It's a people business, and finding the right people, putting them in place, all of that stuff, that rings true to me. That speaks to me because I believe in people being the most important commodity and how you deal with people and putting the right people in place. As far as what it'll mean for the area and will he be good for Washington, and absolutely. Dan Snyder being gone is the first piece of that. But just the fact that now every single state that Washington had been talking to about a stadium is now all interested. Now, can you ultimately get the stadium where it belongs, where it should be, which is DC, downtown DC, at the old RFK site? Probably not. But even that conversation has started again. That was dead with Daniel Snyder. All right. That was dead. So the fact that Virginia's back in play, Maryland's back in play again, even though it was never out of play because that's where the stadium currently is. In worst case scenario, he would have had to build it there again. But DC's also back in play. And so, we'll see what happens. But only positive things can come from this, change. Comasel Brown writes, Rivera has been praising AG during camp. That has me feeling very comfortable about our backfield/weapons. Rivera was speaking very highly of AG last year. If you remember, it was after that Bears game where he was like, he needs to touch it more. And he did the following week against Green Bay, if you recall. So he's always been a proponent of Antonio Gibson getting more opportunities as a pass catcher. And I think we're going to see that this year. Red Wing 01 says, I didn't think it'd be as soon either, but it's not all that surprising given the talent and depth in our secondary. Facts, big facts. I just didn't think it would happen this soon, but I did think at some point he would probably be the odd man out. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. That's going to be garbage time. We'll come back to that comment. Comasel Brown writes, does Lord Brunson just like to push your buttons? I don't think he really knows the talent of our 1 through 4 wide receivers. He doesn't know anything about any of our teams. He just knows about his team. That's why I always get in arguments with him, because he really doesn't know what's going on outside of Philadelphia. He doesn't watch. He watches other games. I can't say that he doesn't, but he doesn't put in the work that some of us do, watching other teams, watching film on other players. So he's not as well versed in terms of what Washington has. Like, he didn't even know we didn't have Cole Holcomb anymore, right? And he called him something else too. He called him Cole something. I don't remember what he called him, but I knew who he was talking about. So he doesn't know all of that stuff. And I'm not upset that he doesn't know, but that's when I got to check you. You know what I mean? And that's where we get into these back and forths. And my problem is we'll start talking about one thing, and it'll always find its way back to y'all ain't made the playoffs last year. Why am I talking to you? That doesn't have anything to do with what we're discussing. But again, when you know you can't win an argument or you don't know what you're talking about, you just go back to the thing that you can lean on and I can't say anything about, And so that's why like I said, I just stay in my lane. Of course he likes pushing my buttons. But that's what we all do. We all like pressing each other's buttons. Brent Busby writes, did you hear Ron say Jacoby ball placement is sticking out? The guy you should say Jacoby has better ball placement. I don't think he said he had better. He just was, that was the thing that stood out about him, was the ball placement. Like, again, he hasn't named a starting quarterback. He's going to talk Jacoby up because he doesn't want Sam to get comfortable. So he's doing what he feels like he needs to do to make sure that Sam understands this is not your job yet. Now, keep in mind, we've heard reports on Jacoby processing slow, holding on to the ball. Like, we've heard all of these things. Ron's not going to speak on that stuff. He's only going to tell you the positive. When they ask him about Jacoby, how's his development coming, he's going to tell you something positive. That's what he's supposed to do. Just like he does with Sam. Like, he's doing the things he feels like he needs to do to make sure that neither one of them feel like there's an advantage either way, even though we all know Sam is going to be the starter. So he did talk about ball placement with Jacoby Brissett in particular today. Independent Outsider writes, getting the team back to RFK Stadium would be fire and the right move for the fans. Hometown was in Central Virginia. Why I'm not a Washington fan is a long story, LOL. Different and personal. At the end of the day, that's where it should be, but just because it should be there doesn't mean that's where it's going to end up. I don't personally think it's going to end up there. I think there are too many people with agendas that live in that area, that work in that area, that don't want it there and are going to make sure that it isn't there when it's all said and done. Red Wing 01 writes, Corey Holcomb is what he called him, LOL. Yeah, like the comedian Corey Holcomb. Like, I knew who he was talking about, but I didn't even try to correct him. I didn't even, because I knew who he meant. And so I went in stride without even blinking. I said, he's not here anymore. He's not here. So yeah. He did call him something else, and I couldn't remember what. He said, Red Wing 01 also writes, Jacoby may have good placement, but I could make a sandwich in the time it takes him to throw the dang ball. And we've heard that he's holding on to the ball forever. We've watched Jacoby Brissett. We know how elongated that release is. We know how long, like, he gets sacked a lot. If you've watched Jacoby Brissett, like, there's no way he's beating Sam Howell out for this job. He's a good guy in the room, great backup quarterback to have, all of that good stuff. There is no way he's the starting quarterback for this team moving forward. So anyway, I digress. Let's go ahead and get to the final segment of the show and garbage time. So, I'm going to read this comment from Red Wing 01 because it takes us right into the final segment of the show. And we're going to talk about DeAndre Hopkins. So Red Wing 01 writes, my favorite D-Hop destination personally is Buffalo. I think their biggest missing piece is a true running mate for Diggs. Gabe Davis is cool, but you can do better than him as a number 2. I think that the best locale for him is Kansas City because they don't truly have a number 1 wide receiver, but they do have a bunch of guys that are capable of hurting you. But Juju Smith-Schuster is no longer there. You still have MVS. You still have Moore. There's no more Nicole Hartman. And so I think they could use, a true number 1 wide receiver. They went out and they traded for Kadarius Toney, but none of these guys are number 1 wide receivers. Yeah, you got Travis Kelce, and he more than makes up for the lack of a true number 1. But at the end of the day, they don't have a guy at the receiver position. And so I think they could use a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, who's a true bona fide number one wide receiver. And again, in Kansas City, it's not about speed. They got plenty of guys that can run. They need a physical, go over the middle, make the tough catch type of guy. That's what Juju Smith-Schuster did for them. That's what Sammy Watkins did for them when they won their first Super Bowl. That's what they were missing without Sammy Watkins, and that's what they got back last year in Juju Smith-Schuster. He's now gone, and with the Patriots, they need another physical receiver that can, out-muscle a guy for the football. DeAndre Hopkins, to me, answers, that bell for them. So I think Kansas City would be the best destination for him. But it's funny because I think neither team is really like pressed to go after him, but they're more so concerned with the other team getting their hands on him. So I think Buffalo is like, we don't have to sign him, but we don't want Kansas City to get him. And Kansas City's like, well, we don't have to sign him, but we don't want Buffalo to get him. He can go anywhere else. They probably would both love it if he ended up with the Browns. Like, okay, that's the place where he can hurt us the least, right? Jets have already said they're not interested. They're good with what they have. We'll see what happens with Buffalo and Kansas City. I think they're both, teams that should be monitored. I ultimately think he ends up in the AFC when it's all said and done. Ultimately think he ends up in the AFC. Whether it's Cleveland, and we know that Deshaun Watson has already put in a call to, D-Hop to gauge his interest in coming to Cleveland, and he's already gotten a thumbs up from D-Hop. And Watson then ran and took that information to the front office, essentially said, hey, he's available. You should go get my guy. And so we'll see what they decide to do as far as Andrew Berry, their GM in Cleveland, is concerned. Because they got Amari Cooper, but boy, they could use another receiver in Cleveland. And if we're to see Deshaun Watson return to form, he's probably going to need a little bit more help. I was not impressed with what they've, assembled out there for him. So I think Cleveland would be a great destination for him as well. But if you're talking about winning a Super Bowl, Buffalo and Kansas City have to be the top two destinations. So we'll see what happens with him there. The biggest issue with him is money. I don't think he's willing to take significantly less, even though he's still being paid. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I'm still shocked that the Cardinals even released him. Still doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. But, that's the NFL for you. Again, they got Ozenfort as their new GM. Anytime you get a new GM, I always tell you guys, you get a new GM, he has no ties to the guys that were on the roster before he got there. And so you get there, and there's a guy that's a bit disgruntled. He's not a part of your future. You didn't bring him there. He's causing a bit of a stir and a ruckus. Tried to move him. You couldn't get any takers. Is it better off? Are you better off with him being on the roster and you being subjected to his constant talking about other destinations and maybe creating a bit of a divisive, force in the locker room? Or are you better off moving on from this guy, eating $20 whatever million of cap space and just washing your hands clean of him? I think they made their decision already, obviously. So we'll see what happens. But I digress. That's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on the 340th installment of the Louie T Network podcast. We'll be back on Friday to tie up any loose ends. We'll recap game one of the NBA Finals as well, and kind of look forward to the weekend and what's in store for that. anything that we may hear, Quentin Williams' deal, I think is going to get done here shortly. That's another, thing worth monitoring over this offseason. One of the few dominoes still left to fall. I talked about, free agents. Zeke Elliott is still available, even though, I wasn't really impressed with what I saw from him last year, but he's still available. If nothing else, he's still physical. So we'll see what happens with him and anybody else that's out there. But until then, I'm your man, Louie T, signing off. You guys have a great rest of your day. Look forward to chopping it up with you in the near future. God bless and good night. The Louie T Network is powered by MusicHead University. MusicHeads, classes in session. Turn me up. Enroll on YouTube now. Link is in the description.
LouieTeeNetwork.